We are reading Oliver Twist. Whoops, wrong side. And we are on chapter 11. Oliver is rescued. After the unsuccessful attempt of the burglary, Oliver was left wounded and unconscious in a ditch by Toby and Sykes as they escaped for their own lives. He regained consciousness quite a few hours later and he felt great pain. He struggled to get up and slowly approached the nearest house. This was actually the house that they had tried to rob. Oliver staggered across the lawn and knocked faintly at the door. The servants of the house came to open the door. "He is a wounded boy," said Giles, one of the servants. "In fact, he is the same boy who belonged to the gang of robbers, and I remember I shot him. Let's make sure he doesn't die. In fact, he should be hanged." The lady of the house came to the door and asked Giles to go to town and bring a doctor at once. There were two ladies who lived in that house. One was a stately elderly woman named Mrs. Maylie. The other was a beautiful young woman about 17 years old. Her name was Rose Maylie. When Dr. Lochinvar arrived, the ladies followed him into the room where Oliver was. Rose felt a kind of affection toward the boy who had such a gentle face. She bent over and gently pushed his hair from his forehead. "It's shocking to imagine that this boy belonged to a group of robbers," said Mrs. Maylie, who was Rose's adopted aunt. Rose looked at him again with affection and sympathy. With kindness in her voice, she said, "He is so young and delicate. Maybe he never had the opportunity to experience a mother's love. Perhaps he never had a home and a family of his own. It can be true that he was forced into the world of thieves and burglars because he was starving and he had no other alternative." Rose kept on reflecting as she looked at Oliver's face, and finally she concluded, saying, "We must all consider this before we decide to send him to jail." Oliver had lost a lot of blood when he was wounded, so he was very weak and ill. Rose cared for him for days, as did Mrs. Maylie and Dr. Loshburn. His health slowly showed signs of improvement. When he was strong enough to talk and share his thoughts with them, he related the story of his life to the Maylies. Rose was very sad to hear it. "We need to help this boy in some way," Rose urged. Mrs. Maylie also thought that they should do something. She asked the doctor if he could suggest something. Dr. Loshburn suggested that they convince the service that Oliver was not the same boy who belonged to the group of robbers and could thus save him from the hands of the police. The doctor asked the servants to come before him. He asked if they were completely sure that he was the same boy who had come with the robbers, and if they were not mistaken in identifying him in the darkness amidst all of the gunshots. The servants said that they could not be so sure that he was the same boy. When the policeman came, nobody in the house was able to identify the boy, so there were no charges against him. Oliver began recovering from his wounds and started living a happy life again, for the first time since he had stayed with the Brownlows. He was treated like a son by the Maylies and even taken to their country cottage in the summertime. One day, Dr. Loshburn took him to Mr. Brownlow's house. Oliver was so eager to tell Mr. Brownlow why he had not returned with the books. But there was nobody living in the house anymore, and a "To Let" sign was hanging there. They heard from the neighborhood that Mr. Brownlow, Mrs. Bedwin, and also Mr. Ginwig had packed their bags and left for the West Indies. Oliver was very disappointed. He, however, spent time fruitfully with the Maylies. He helped them with their housework, learned to read and to write, and also enjoyed himself. He happily ran along the country roads, picking wildflowers along the way. He fed the birds, and he listened to Rose play the piano during the evenings. Their happiness was interrupted when Rose developed a bad fever. She could not play the piano any more. Every day she seemed to grow weaker. One day Mrs. Maylie sent Oliver to fetch Dr. Loshburn. On the way, Oliver came across a horrible-looking man who had purple lips and red sores on his hands. He came running towards Oliver and cursed him, saying, "Why can't you die? Why can't I be free of you?" And he raised his fists threateningly. Oliver ran away from him as fast as he could. When he was far away from the man, Oliver turned his head back to see that the man had fallen on the ground and was foaming in a fit of epilepsy. Rose's fever kept increasing, and Dr. Loshburn stayed at her bedside for many days, saying that there was nothing to do but hope and to pray for her. After 3 nights of terrible fever, Rose was better on the fourth day. The doctor said that the danger was over. Oliver was extremely happy at that Rose had recovered, and he ran to the garden to collect beautiful flowers for her sick room. When he returned to the cottage, Oliver saw a handsome young man climb down from the coach. He was Mrs. Maylie's son, Harry. Harry asked his mother why she had not written him earlier, saying that Rose was so sick. "I waited because I didn't want you to marry her, though I myself love her dearly," exclaimed Mrs. Maylie. "But you know the story of her birth is doubtful, and that is a stain on her name. If you marry her now and then turn against her later, she will suffer. And I don't want her to suffer," she added slowly. "I will never turn against Rose, for I love her so dearly," said Harry. It was agreed that Harry could see Rose as soon as she was well enough to leave the room. The next evening, Oliver was sitting in the garden reading a book when Fagin's face appeared from behind the thick bushes. "Come away, my boy," Fagin whispered to him. And then another man's face appeared behind the bushes, the man with the purple lips and the red sores on his hands, who had tried to attack Oliver in town a few days back. Within a few moments, the faces disappeared, and Oliver was screaming for help. Oliver mentioned the incident to Harry, who thought it must have been a dream, but Oliver was sure it was reality. When Rose recovered completely, Harry had a long conversation with her. Harry told her that his greatest desire was to win Rose's heart and that he had loved her since they were both children. "You must think of me as a childhood friend and give up the thought of marrying me," said Rose. She explained that she bore a stain on her name and that her parentage was not properly known. If a gentleman like Harry married her, the people would soon scorn her because of her unknown background, and she asked Harry to go. "I will go, but within a year I will talk to you about it again," said Harry, and he left the room. And that is the end of chapter 12.